Mr. Vance, I'm surprised to see you in Charlotte without notice.
Outside the glass wall, the finance floor goes quiet.
But why is a terminated employee accused of fraud sitting in this room? That woman was removed yesterday for stealing $45,000.
I didn't touch that money.
Then why did your login approve the transfer?
3 coworkers outside exchange nervous looks.
You lost your job, your access, and your right to be heard here.
My daughter needed that health fund.
And yet you stole from it.
The room falls into a hard, uncomfortable silence.
Say that again after an independent audit? You do not get to challenge me in my own boardroom.
Enough. The audit expert unlocks the briefcase. This is not a budget meeting, Meredith. Open to page 14.
What is this supposed to be?
At 2:14 a.m., Elia Vance's employee ID approved the transfer.
Oh my God.
Do not interrupt him. The transfer did not come from Elia Vance's device. It came from a Dell Latitude assigned exclusively to Meredith Albright. 3 days ago, you humiliated the wrong woman.
Meredith Albright did not blink at that plea. The middle-aged woman lightly turned the diamond ring on her ring finger, her sharp eyes fixed on Alia's paling face. The glass conference room on the 14th floor of Vanguard Logistics seemed to have all the air sucked out of it. The termination agreement had already been printed and placed boldly beside the file about the financial shortfall. The bold line stating dismissed for serious misconduct with no severance of any kind stood out clearly under the harsh white fluorescent lights. The HR director, sitting beside her, could only stare at the fountain pen on the table, not daring to look toward the single mother. Meredith leaned forward, her hands folded together, her even voice carrying a fake kindness that made people shiver. She slowly said that the company had always known about Alia's difficult situation with little Maya, and that the burden of paying expensive mental health bills as a mother was too much for anyone. But Meredith stressed that using company accounts and system access to secretly transfer money to pay personal medical bills was a serious crime. The accusation hit Alia like a blow to the chest. Her mind spun as she stared at the system log shown on the projector screen. An account under her name had logged in and made the transfer at 2 a.m. the previous Sunday. That was the exact time she had been sitting collapsed beside her daughter's hospital bed, her hands never touching any computer throughout the entire 48-hour weekend. Around her, 30 coworkers still chose silence. The printer in the corner continued humming through its usual cycle, but no one dared to cough or even lift a hand to adjust their glasses. The young white man at the desk beside her, the same man whose entire balance sheet Alia had fixed the previous week so he could submit the quarterly report on time, now stared only at his dark phone screen. Isolation wrapped around her quickly and cruelly, like a corporate process programmed to remove a faulty cell without checking the truth. Alia wanted to speak. She wanted to shout that the branch's cybersecurity system had a hole in it. But her throat felt blocked by a bitter lump when she saw the quick smile that flashed at the corner of Meredith's mouth. Only 48 hours earlier, Alia's life had still been moving along a hard but hopeful path. The alarm on her phone rang at 4:30 in the morning inside the duplex apartment in West End. The air around her was still heavy with Charlotte's morning fog, and the early cold slipped through the cracks of the rotting wooden window frame. Alia sat up from the sagging spring mattress, and the first thing she did was step quietly into the small room next door to check her daughter's breathing. Maya was lying on her side, holding a worn-out teddy bear tightly, her small legs sometimes curling up as if the child were still trying to run away from the terrifying memories of the explosion at her old elementary school. Alia went down to the kitchen, the wooden floor groaning under her feet. She did not turn on the tube light because she did not want to wake her daughter. She only turned on the small yellow lamp in the corner of the kitchen to prepare the lunchbox. Half a loaf of sandwich bread from 3 days earlier had begun to harden around the edges, but she carefully cut those parts away with a knife, spread a thin layer of peanut butter over it, and wrapped it neatly in foil. On top of the plastic container, Alia stuck a yellow note written carefully in blue ink. "Mommy is always proud of you, my strong girl." For herself, she only poured 1 spoonful of instant black coffee into a chipped ceramic mug, added boiling water, and drank it in large gulps while the bitter liquid was still steaming. That had been her only breakfast for the past 4 years, just to make sure the small medical support money did not fall short by even 1 cent. At exactly 5:20 in the morning, Alia held Maya's hand and walked to the bus stop 3 blocks from home. West End at that hour was filled only with sanitation workers and late-night shift employees returning home in exhaustion. Maya did not say a word. The 9-year-old only squeezed her mother's fingers whenever the roar of a truck engine came from the highway. Selective mutism had turned her once lively daughter into a quiet shadow, communicating only through crayon drawings on scraps of paper. Aaliyah watched the number 54 bus slowly pull into the stop under the weak yellow lights, knowing it would take her nearly 50 minutes to reach busy Uptown, where the glass tower of Vanguard Logistics stood tall. At work, Aaliyah was always the first one to arrive. Her small cubicle sat deep in the corner of the 14th floor, where sunlight never reached directly and where she was surrounded by towering stacks of financial files. The job of a mid-level financial analyst required absolute accuracy down to every comma in international logistics cash flows. Every day, Aaliyah had to process hundreds of complex spreadsheets and search for mistakes in the billing systems of subcontractors. Her coworkers often had the habit of pushing the hardest tasks onto her desk at 5 in the afternoon, then leaving calmly to make it home for dinner with their families. Aaliyah always stayed behind, quietly fixing errors and preparing complete reports so that the next morning Meredith Albright could simply sign her name and submit them to corporate leadership as if they were her own work. Aaliyah never complained about it because she knew this position gave her one priceless thing that no cash could replace: the company's premium PPO health insurance plan. Only that insurance card allowed her to take Maya to top psychologists at Atrium Health without waiting an entire year on public aid lists. For a single mother, that blue plastic card was the only life raft keeping her daughter from sinking deeper into permanent panic. In the middle of work that day, Aaliyah had asked to leave lunch 30 minutes early so she could rush to the psychologist's office at Atrium Health. Her hurried footsteps echoed over the hospital's polished tile floor. The smell of disinfectant and the sound of heart monitors always gave her a nervous feeling she could not explain. Sitting across from her at the wooden desk, the doctor looked at Maya's medical file and let out a small sigh. He explained that Maya's intensive therapy plan using brainwave stimulation and behavioral recovery was showing positive progress, but it needed to continue without interruption for at least the next 12 months, not even missing 1 week. But what left Aaliyah frozen was when the doctor pushed the cost estimate for the next quarter toward her. He explained that if Vanguard Logistics did not renew or canceled the verification of her current health insurance for any HR-related reason, her out-of-pocket cost would jump to $1,200 per month. It was a huge amount, more than all the base pay she had left after rent, utilities, and basic living costs in West End. Aaliyah stared at the black number printed on the paper, her fingers gripping the edge of her handbag until her knuckles turned white. She looked up and tried to keep her voice from shaking as she asked if the hospital had any long-term payment plan or low-income support program for her case. The doctor looked at her with sympathy, but his head shake crushed the small hope that had just begun to rise. Back in the company conference room in the present moment, Aaliyah watched the termination agreement being pushed toward her again. Meredith Albright tapped her finger lightly on the oak table, the steady knocking sound like a death sentence for Maya's future. She urged Aaliyah to sign the document so everything could be settled quietly in-house. Otherwise, the company would be forced to report the case to the county sheriff's office, and then it would no longer stop at losing a job. Aaliyah looked at the black pen in front of her. She knew that if she signed, she would be admitting she was a thief. Her name in Charlotte's finance industry would be destroyed, and she would never get another office job again. But if she refused, Meredith would immediately bring in cybersecurity and the police, and Aaliyah could be taken away while Maya waited for her at home. The protective instinct of a mother rose inside Aaliyah's chest. She stood up straight, her thin shoulders steady beneath the old blazer. She did not touch the pen. She looked Meredith directly in the eyes without flinching. In a calm, clear voice, she said she would not sign any document admitting to a crime she did not commit, and she demanded that the company conduct an independent technical investigation into the IP address that had accessed the system under that account. Meredith's face changed for 1/10 of a second, a flash of anger passing through the older woman's eyes before she quickly returned to her familiar cold expression. She pressed the button on the internal phone and ordered security to come to the conference room immediately. 2 large security guards in dark blue uniforms appeared at the conference room door within minutes. They stepped to both sides of Aaliyah, their radios crackling with irritating static. Meredith stood, crossed her arms, and ordered them to escort Aaliyah out of the building while confiscating all employee cards and company-owned items. Aaliyah's employee card, the blue plastic card printed with a picture of her hopeful smile from 4 years earlier, was yanked hard from the lanyard around her neck by the guard's rough hand. She was escorted down the long office hallway under the eyes of dozens of people staring from behind cubicle walls. No one stepped out. No one asked if she was okay. There was only the hurried clacking of keyboards, as if everyone was trying to prove they had nothing to do with the person being cast out. Aaliyah stepped out through the glass revolving doors of the Vanguard Logistics Tower, and a cold afternoon Charlotte wind hit her straight in the face. Rain began to fall, heavy drops quickly soaking her hair and seeping into the thin fabric of her beige coat. She walked toward the bus stop, her old dress shoes with worn soles nearly making her slip on the wet sidewalk. Her body trembled from the cold and from the exhaustion of hours of extreme stress. But her mind held only the image of Maya. Her health insurance plan would automatically lock at midnight tonight, and all her daughter's therapy appointments would be completely canceled tomorrow morning. What could she do to get $200 in less than 24 hours when she did not even have a large bill in her pocket? She sat down on the freezing metal bench at the bus stop, rainwater dripping from the small shelter onto her shoulder. Just then, the old phone in her coat pocket vibrated for a long moment. Aaliyah quickly pulled it out with trembling hands, secretly hoping it was a call from a coworker telling her everything had only been a system mistake. But the screen did not show a caller's name. It only showed an automatic text message from Wells Fargo. Aaliyah opened the message, the light from the phone screen reflecting in her tear-filled eyes. The words appeared clearly in English, stating that according to an official request from the Internal Fraud Investigation and Legal Department of Vanguard Logistics, all personal bank accounts linked to her tax ID had been frozen for the verification of missing assets. The available balance in her only account, where she kept the entire previous month's salary she had saved to pay rent and buy food for her daughter, now showed only $14.50. A bus horn echoed from far away, and its headlights swept across the single mother sitting frozen in the pouring rain, while around her, a cold social system had slammed every exit shut for mother and child. The bus horn groaned as it braked hard at the uptown Charlotte stop like an angry, unfinished sentence, leaving Aaliyah Vance alone in the rain, where bubbles rose on the gray concrete sidewalk. She stood silently in her cheap beige blazer, now soaked through, both thumbs still digging into the edge of her cracked phone. The Wells Fargo account freeze notice still glowed on the screen, like an invisible clamp squeezing the last bit of air from her lungs. Aaliyah took a deep breath, the salty taste of rain mixing with the sharp cold of the southern November wind on her tongue. She could not stand here waiting for mercy from the weather. Maya was at home with Mrs. Helen, and the biological clock of the premium PPO health insurance was counting down hour by hour before officially collapsing at midnight. Aaliyah decided not to take the bus home right away. The instinct of a financial analyst with 4 years of experience pushed her to make one last effort at the place where the knot had been tied. She turned and hurried back toward the glass tower of Vanguard Logistics, where lights from the upper floors still cast out a luxurious glow, ignoring the chaos of working-class life below the streetlights. Her goal was the HR office on the 6th floor, the place that, in corporate theory, should be the last shelter for complaints about systemic unfairness. She used the visitor entrance and slipped carefully through the revolving door, trying not to attract the attention of the 2 evening security guards who were busy staring at the surveillance screens. The service elevator took her to the 6th floor with a soft ding, opening into a space thick with the smell of new wool carpet and artificial pine air freshener. Aaliyah walked to the HR director's office door. She was about to knock, but her hand stopped in midair. Inside, half the tube lights had already been turned off, and only the desktop computer of the HR assistant was running a screensaver. Another familiar ding sounded, but this time it came from the phone in her coat pocket. It was an official email from the shared HR inbox, signed by the branch HR director herself. Aaliyah read each line written in cold, precise corporate language. The email stated that all requests for in-person meetings or explanations from her were being denied at this time. The case file related to the $45,000 shortfall had been sent directly to the company's legal and special audit departments. The final line of the email stood like a concrete wall blocking every exit. All further communication between her and Vanguard Logistics must be conducted through the legal representatives of both parties. The nature of invisible discrimination in the American corporate world always works this way. It does not use direct insults. It hides behind standard operating procedures. They call it a safety measure to protect company assets. But for a black single mother living in the working class West End like Aaliyah, that rule was a death sentence to every path of survival. 1 hour of labor law consultation in Central Charlotte cost at least $350, an amount far beyond reach for someone whose accounts had just been frozen and who had exactly $14.50 left. The corporate legal system was designed to create a fair playing field, but the cost of entering that field automatically removed people like her before the game even began. Aaliyah stood still in the 6th floor hallway, the hum of the central air system seeming to mock her helplessness. She knew she had no reason to stay there anymore. Heavy steps carried her out of the building and toward the light rail station to catch a late train back to the west side of the city. When Aaliyah pushed open the wooden door of the old duplex apartment in West End, the smell of sweet corn chicken soup from the old pressure cooker drifted out, trying to cover the damp odor of the North Carolina rainy season. Mrs. Helen, the kind older neighbor, was sitting in a worn floral armchair, knitting needles in hand. She looked up at Aaliyah, and the eyes of a black woman who had lived through half a century of social changes immediately read the exhaustion behind the soaked beige coat. She did not ask anything. She only nodded gently, stood, gathered her things, and whispered that Maya had eaten dinner and was in her room drawing. Aaliyah hung her coat on the rusty metal hook beside the door and rubbed her palms together to bring back a little warmth before going into her daughter's room. She took a deep breath, forced a fake smile onto her tired face, and gently pushed open Maya's door. The 9-year-old girl was sitting cross-legged on the knotted rug in the middle of the floor, surrounded by rough drawing paper and a few pieces of black charcoal she had picked up from the old firewood pile beside the neighbor's house. Maya did not look up right away, but her small shoulders flinched slightly when she heard the door. The child had a natural sensitivity, an emotional radar formed after months of living in constant fear. Maya's eyes stopped on the cardboard box Aaliyah held in her arms, filled with her personal mug, a few notebooks, and the few office items she had brought home from Vanguard Logistics. The 9-year-old did not cry. She did not ask why her mother had brought work things home on a weekday. She only quietly set down the piece of charcoal and gently wiped her black-dusted hands on her faded gray sweatpants. Maya stood and took small steps toward her mother. She placed her thin little hand against Aaliyah's calloused palm, the calluses built from years of working in an office while also cleaning houses at night for extra income. For a long, silent moment between mother and daughter, only the low humming of the old refrigerator in the kitchen cut through the room. Maya reached into her pocket and took out a wrinkled $5 bill, its edges worn and clumsily smoothed flat. It was the small money she had saved over 3 weeks by helping Mrs. Helen water the sage plants on the front porch. The girl placed the $5 bill in Aaliyah's palm, then turned over the small plastic board she had used to communicate since selective mutism took over. On the board, Maya had written in black marker with messy but very clear handwriting, "Mommy, I don't need to see the psychologist anymore. I feel better already. Please keep this money." The clear look in her 9-year-old daughter's eyes and the way she understood too much too soon pierced the last wall of Aaliyah's emotional defenses like a sharp needle. She could not let her daughter see her collapse. Aaliyah gently held Maya's shoulders, kissed her forehead, and whispered that she needed to go wash up because the rain had been so cold. She hurried into the narrow bathroom, closed the small door, and locked the metal latch. Aaliyah turned the shower faucet all the way on. The water came out freezing at first, then slowly warmed as it poured onto the yellowed tile floor. She sat down on the bathroom floor, wrapped both arms around her knees, and buried her face between the rough fabric of her dress pants. She let her sobs break loose, fully covered by the loud, violent rush of water from the shower above. Aaliyah did not cry only because of the injustice done to her. She cried from the helplessness of a mother who realized her dignity and sacrifices were being crushed by a heartless corporate machine, and her little daughter was learning to grow up by giving up her own right to heal. 50 minutes later, Aaliyah stepped out of the bathroom with her face dried, though the edges of her eyes still carried faint red lines. She sat at the fake wood plastic dining table in the corner. Her old personal laptop, the only piece of technology she owned, slowly started up with the loud whirring of its chip fan. Aaliyah knew she could not give up. She needed proof, a witness, or any trace that could show she had not been at the office or logged into the system at 2 a.m. on that historic Sunday. The only person who might help her now was Sarah Jenkins, a white coworker in the finance department, the person who sat in the cubicle across from Aaliyah, and the same person for whom Aaliyah had spent 3 full weekend nights finishing the entire road transport cost analysis report last month. Sarah had always acted like a close sister at work. She often shared donuts bought from the shop down the street and kept saying how much she admired Aaliyah's skill with numbers. Aaliyah dialed Sarah's number. The phone rang long and dry in the quiet space of the West End apartment. It was not until the 5th ring that the call connected, but there was no warm greeting like usual. There was only the background noise of a loud place, soft jazz music, and the clinking of glass cups, the familiar sounds of a relaxing evening downtown. "Sarah, it's me, Aaliyah," she said, trying to keep her voice professionally calm. "I'm sorry to call you at this hour, but I'm in serious trouble. I need you to help confirm with HR or Meredith that last Friday afternoon you saw me hand over all my documents and leave the office at 5:30 to go to the hospital with Maya, and I did not take the company's secured laptop home with me." The other end stayed silent for several long seconds, a calculating silence that let Aaliyah hear Sarah's hesitant breath through the speaker. When Sarah spoke, her voice was lower, carrying clear confusion and distance. "I'm really sorry about what happened to you at the office today," Sarah said, her whisper sounding as if she was trying to hide from someone nearby. "But you know, I'm only a contract employee waiting for renewal. This afternoon, right after security took you out, Meredith held a short meeting with everyone in the department. She made it clear that the finance system has a serious leak and anyone who contacts, provides information to, or helps the person under investigation will be considered an accomplice and will be terminated immediately without warning procedure. Sarah, you know I didn't do it." Aaliyah's voice began to tremble with disappointment. "You know better than anyone how hard I worked for that department. I only need you to tell HR the truth, just one sentence about the timeline." "I can't, Aaliyah. I really can't." Sarah cut her off in a rush, while laughter from other finance employees rose behind her again. Meredith is looking over at me now. She rented out the whole restaurant tonight to celebrate finishing the quarterly report. I have to hang up. Please don't call this number again. The empty dial tone sounded through the phone. Aaliyah slowly lowered it onto the table. The betrayal from someone she had once considered her closest ally at work was not only a painful blow to her trust, it was also a cruel real-life lesson in how American corporate culture can absorb people. The fear of losing personal financial safety had turned ordinary coworkers into helpers of injustice through their own cowardly silence. While Aaliyah sat facing the darkness in her small West End kitchen, the Capitol Grill Steakhouse in the heart of uptown Charlotte was filled with a completely opposite atmosphere. Crystal chandeliers cast warm golden light onto tables covered in spotless white linen. Meredith Albright stood at the center of a long table, holding a crystal glass filled with expensive red wine that cost as much as a cleaner's weekly pay. Around her, the entire finance department of Vanguard Logistics' Charlotte branch was applauding. The dinner was held under the name of celebrating the branch's excellent reduction in logistics operating costs for the quarter, an achievement that everyone knew was largely thanks to the optimization algorithms Aaliyah Vance had quietly built over the past 2 months. But now the name Aaliyah Vance had been erased from the company's storage system. In her place, Meredith proudly declared that her own management sharpness had helped the branch remove an internal fraudster and protect the company's transparency. Meredith took a small sip of wine, her eyes moving across the cheerful faces around her, stopping for 1 second on Sarah Jenkins, who had just returned to the table with a slightly stiff face after the phone call in the dark corner. Meredith smiled, a satisfied smile of someone holding absolute power. She knew the $45,000 taken from the Employee Health Support Fund was already safely sitting in her personal derivative account overseas, and turning Aaliyah into the scapegoat had been a perfect move that left no trace strong enough to shake her standing with corporate leadership. At the same time in West End, a dry and urgent knock sounded, breaking the silence over Aaliyah's apartment. The knock did not carry the politeness of a visitor. It carried the cold pressure of someone executing an order. Aaliyah went to the door. Standing outside in the narrow hallway was Mr. Miller, the duplex building manager, holding a green clipboard folder. Mr. Miller was an older white man with a face always hardened by the worries of managing rental properties in an area with a high rate of late rent. He did not step inside. He only looked at Aaliyah with tired eyes and pushed an official notice toward her, stamped in red by the landlord's law office. "Ms. Vance, I'm sorry to do this so late in the evening," Mr. Miller said, his voice rough from years of smoking. "But I just received a notice from the bank's automatic payment system saying your rent payment for this month was rejected because the source account is frozen. This is a 5-day pay or quit notice under North Carolina housing law." Aaliyah looked at the paper, the legal language about starting eviction proceedings appearing under the dim hallway light. Mr. Miller stressed that if the full rent place fees was not paid by the 5th of the month using a clean account or a bank-guaranteed cashier's check, the landlord would immediately file in county court to begin forced eviction and property seizure. "Miller, please listen to me," Aaliyah pleaded, one hand gripping the wooden door frame to keep herself from collapsing. "My account is only under temporary administrative review because of trouble at work. I have lived here for 3 years and have never been late on rent by even 1 day. Please give me 2 more weeks." "I'm just an employee, Ms. Vance," Mr. Miller said coldly as he turned and walked away, his heavy footsteps sounding down the old hallway. "The landlord doesn't care about your reasons. The law is the law. If there's no money by the 5th, you and your daughter will have to leave." The door closed. Aaliyah leaned back against the wood, and the ultimatum slipped from her powerless fingers, falling to the floor beside the wrinkled $5 bill Maya had given her earlier. The wall clock in the living room ticked forward, moving closer to midnight. In less than 3 hours, Maya's health insurance would officially be cut off. Aaliyah's bank account was frozen, and now even the only roof protecting her daughter was at risk of being taken by a housing system with no room for compassion. Aaliyah Vance stood in the dark room and realized she had been pushed completely into the corner of an unequal fight, where she had no weapon, no money, and not a single ally standing with her. The cloudy white fluorescent lights of the Mecklenburg County Public Library surrounded Aaliyah Vance like an invisible pressure, pulling her away from the worries waiting outside to choke her and her daughter. She sat at the wooden tables near the back of the room, where the soft rustle of turning book pages and the clacking keyboards of homeless people coming in from the cold created a quiet background sound. The public desktop computer for local residents limited each login session to exactly 60 minutes. Aaliyah did not waste even 1 second feeling sorry for herself. Her eyes were streaked red from lack of sleep, but her fingers still moved quickly over the worn plastic keyboard whose letters had faded away. Accessing the public financial reports, Vanguard Logistics was required to publish under United States Securities and Exchange Commission rules. The knowledge of an excellent financial analyst did not disappear when her employee card was taken away. Instead of letting despair numb her mind, Aaliyah began redrawing the cash flow map of the Charlotte branch using memory and the public numbers on the screen. She focused on variable expense categories and internal welfare funds, where management holes were usually easiest to exploit. After nearly 40 minutes of continuous cross-checking, a mathematical pattern began to show clearly beneath the lifeless numbers. The fund shortfalls, including the employee health support money she had been accused of stealing, always appeared systematically on the 15th of each month. For an ordinary person, the 15th was just a date in the middle of the month. But for an experienced financial analyst like Aaliyah, that number was directly connected to the Wall Street stock market. The 15th was when high-level stock option derivative contracts matured. Anyone making personal margin trades with heavy leverage would face extreme liquidity pressure on that date if the market moved against their prediction. Aaliyah leaned back in the plastic chair, her breathing slowing as she understood the nature of the problem. The person behind this was not simply stealing money for luxury spending. They were using the company welfare fund as a short-term overdraft account to rescue losing personal investment portfolios. And the only person at the Charlotte branch with enough authority to approve privileged money transfers at that time, without passing through the chief accountant's review, was Meredith Albright. When the computer showed a notice that only 5 minutes remained in the session, Aaliyah quickly copied the dates and transaction codes onto a small piece of paper. She knew she had found the answer to the cash flow pattern, but the numbers in public reports were not enough legal proof to show her personal account had been hacked. She needed a digital trace, undeniable data buried deep inside the internal cybersecurity servers she no longer had access to. Aaliyah stepped out of the library after Charlotte city lights had come on. The afternoon rain had stopped, leaving shining puddles reflecting the neon signs of convenience stores. Following short instructions she received through a secure messaging app from a number not saved in her contacts, she took a late bus to a small donut shop in the southern suburbs, far from the busy financial center. The shop was nearly empty at that hour, with only the low hum of the soda cooler and the familiar smell of frying oil. Sitting at the hidden corner table near the emergency exit was Marcus Reyes, the company's cybersecurity engineer. He wore a black hoodie pulled low over his head, both hands wrapped around a paper coffee cup that had gone cold. Marcus looked around once before pushing the chair across from him toward Aaliyah as she walked in. "I don't have much time, Aaliyah," Marcus said, his voice low and fast, his eyes constantly checking the parking lot outside the glass window. "If anyone sees me here with you, I'll lose my job before I can pay this month's electric bill. You know I have 2 little kids and a mortgage in Gastonia, right?" "I understand, Marcus," Aaliyah answered, her voice gentle but firm. "I don't want to drag you into trouble, but you are the only person in the office who knows the structure of the monitoring system. I just need to know the truth about that IP address." Marcus did not answer right away. He reached into his jacket pocket, took out a small silver USB drive, placed it on the fake wood Formica table, covered it with his palm, and slowly pushed it toward Aaliyah. "I can't testify for you publicly in court or in front of HR, Aaliyah. Corporate cybersecurity will crush me if I extract company data on my own," Marcus whispered, his eyes showing the stress of a worker gambling with his family's safety. "But I can't sit still and watch Meredith destroy your life. On this USB is the raw copy of the archived log files from the branch's multi-factor authentication server from last Sunday night." Aaliyah looked at the USB and she could hear her heart pounding in her chest. Marcus continued explaining the real corporate technical details. He said whoever made the money transfer had prepared very carefully. That person had set up a virtual network device to fake an IP address from a server in Atlanta, making it match Aaliyah's location while she was caring for her child. But that person made a fatal mistake common among people who do not deeply understand hardware infrastructure. No matter how cleverly an IP address is hidden through a private network, the company's internal server still automatically records the fixed physical MAC address of the network card attached to the hardware board. "The MAC address recorded in that $45,000 transfer was not yours, Aaliyah?" Marcus said, his voice hardening as he gave her the key information. "It matches exactly with the hardware identifier of the Dell Latitude laptop personally assigned by the company to Meredith Albright. She was sitting right in her suburban apartment in South Park, logging into your account and approving the transfer herself." Aaliyah tightened her hand around the USB. The weight of that small metal object carried the whole truth that could clear her name. But before she could thank him, Marcus stood, zipped his jacket up high, and quickly walked out through the back door of the donut shop, disappearing into the darkness of the suburb and leaving Aaliyah alone with the question of her next step. The narrator paused in a thoughtful voice. "If you were in Aaliyah's position right now, holding a USB with evidence that had not yet been legally verified but could destroy your boss's career, would you send it to the press immediately for revenge or patiently wait for a system that had already turned its back on you? Leave your thoughts in the comments. While Alia was making her way back from the suburbs at the London headquarters of Vanguard Logistics, a private jet had just landed on the runway in the cold night. Robert Vance, the founder and CEO of the corporation, stepped into his office after a long business trip in Europe. He did not turn on the ceiling lights. He only turned on the metal desk lamp, sending a focused light onto the file placed at the center of his desk. Robert Vance was not the kind of CEO who appeared in fashion magazines making empty statements about business ethics. He had started as a legal audit specialist at one of the Big Four firms, spending half his life dealing with large-scale financial fraud cases before building his own logistics empire. On his computer screen now was an urgent report from the corporation's centralized cybersecurity monitoring system. This system operated completely independently from local branches and automatically sent alerts whenever it detected a conflict between login information and digital authentication signatures. Robert looked at Alia Vance's personnel file displayed beside the alert. He scanned her 4-year work history, her performance reviews always ranking in the top 5%, and the fact that she had never taken a day off except during the period when her daughter had to be hospitalized for an emergency. The instinct of a veteran auditor told him that a financial analyst as skilled as Alia would never leave fraud traces so clumsy and obvious that a regional director like Meredith could discover them within only a few hours. Robert Vance picked up the desk phone and dialed a secure internal number connected directly to an independent forensic audit firm based in Washington, D.C. "Arthur, I need you to send a special audit team, your 3 best people, to the Charlotte branch tonight," Robert said, his voice low, cold, and without the slightest emotional hesitation. "I want a full review of all cash flows in the Employee Welfare Fund over the last 2 quarters. Do not notify branch management. Access the system through headquarters secure gateway." After hanging up, Robert Vance stood by the window and looked down at the city lights. He understood that a financial shortfall in one small branch would not shake the corporation, but the erosion of integrity in senior management would be a cancer cell destroying corporate culture from inside. He needed clean evidence, verified by an independent agency, before making the final decision. Alia returned to her West End apartment when the clock had passed 1 in the morning. Maya was sleeping deeply in the small bed, her hands still tightly holding a blank drawing paper as a defensive habit. Alia sat down in the old padded chair by the window, the USB from Marcus lying in her palm, reflecting the dim light from the street lamp outside. The silence of a working-class home at night always carried a pressing feeling, where worries about rent and health insurance hung overhead like a sentence not yet carried out. She knew she was holding a flame that could burn Meredith down, but she also understood the rules of the corporate world. If she released this data on social media or sent it to tabloids to satisfy immediate anger, the company's lawyers would instantly use confidentiality clauses in her employment contract to sue her back. They would turn her from a victim into someone who had stolen company intellectual property, and then her only chance to clear her name would close completely. She needed legal intervention, but her faith in Vanguard Logistics' management system had shattered after the afternoon when she was humiliated in front of 30 coworkers. Just as Alia was about to stand up and sleep for a few hours before the new day began, her cracked screen phone suddenly vibrated hard on the plastic table. The sound broke the silence of the room and startled her. The screen showed an unknown number with the area code of the corporate headquarters. Alia hesitated for 1 second before swiping to answer. She pressed the phone to her ear and did not speak first. She only heard steady breathing and the soft sound of papers turning on the other end. When the voice came through, it was not Meredith's manipulative tone or HR's avoidance. It was a low, cold voice carrying the natural authority of the person holding the highest power in the corporation. "Good evening, Alia." "This is Robert Vance," the man on the other end said, each word slow and clear. "I know what happened to you at the Charlotte office this afternoon. I have reviewed your performance file and the cybersecurity report from the headquarters ecosystem." Alia felt her throat go dry. She gripped the edge of the table to keep her voice from breaking. "Mr. CEO, I did not touch that money. I have proof that my account was misused from another device." "I am not calling to hear explanations over the phone, Alia," Robert Vance interrupted politely but firmly. His working style had no room for emotional conversations in the middle of the night. "Tomorrow morning at exactly 8 o'clock, I want you at the Charlotte branch office. Use the back entrance for executives. My assistant will meet you in the private elevator lobby, and most important, do not talk about this with anyone, not even your closest coworkers in finance. Bring everything you have." The call ended with a dry click. Alia slowly lowered the phone, her heartbeat seeming to merge with the clock ticking toward morning. Dawn was getting closer behind Charlotte's high-rise buildings, carrying a turning point she could not predict. Alia looked at the silver USB on the table. She knew there was no turning back, and the meeting at 8 the next morning in the executive conference room would decide the entire fate of her and her daughter inside the corporate power system. At exactly 8 in the morning, Meredith Albright stepped out of the private elevator on the 14th floor, her high heels striking sharp sounds against the polished granite floor of the Charlotte branch office. She held a navy blue folder in her hand, feeling extremely pleased because she believed that morning's meeting was only the normal budget approval process for the new quarter. Meredith gently pushed open the thick oak door of the boardroom, expecting the familiar space with an empty mahogany table and her usual Starbucks coffee already prepared. Instead, Meredith's steps stopped at the doorway. The air inside the large room was completely tightened by the highest level of social tension. Sitting at the head of the table was not the local branch director, but Robert Vance, the founder and CEO of the corporation. He sat motionless, both hands folded on the tabletop, his sharp eyes aimed directly at the door like a hunter patiently waiting for prey to step into a trap. Beside him sat two middle-aged men in expensive dark gray suits, their faces expressionless, their hands resting near two leather briefcases with metal combination locks, the clear sign of an independent forensic audit team. In the hidden corner at the end of the room, Aaliyah Vance sat silently in a leather chair, her hands clasped tightly on her knees, her face calm but her eyes showing the firmness of someone who had endured days of injustice. Meredith quickly regained the confidence of an experienced executive, immediately using behavioral psychology techniques to try to take back control inside this power space. She did not even look toward Aaliyah. She directed her gaze straight at Robert Vance, raised her eyebrows in surprise, and spoke with the subtle attack common in the corporate world. "Mr. CEO, I am truly surprised to see you at the branch this morning without prior notice," Meredith said, her voice even intentionally leaving a pause to increase the pressure. "But what confuses me even more is why a former employee who was just terminated for serious financial fraud, such as Aaliyah Vance, is allowed to sit in this confidential boardroom. This completely violates our security rules and corporate risk management standards." Robert Vance did not become angry at Meredith's psychological attack. He did not move a finger. He only slightly tilted his head, signaling to one of the two men in gray suits. The man immediately opened the locked leather briefcase, took out a 50-page report bound with a shiny black spiral, and lightly slid it across the smooth mahogany table toward Meredith's position. "Meredith, you should sit down and open to page 14, Robert Vance said, his voice deep and calm but carrying a cold authority that made the fluorescent lights above seem to buzz louder. "This is not a budget approval meeting. This is the result of a special investigation into digital traces and system archive logs over the past 6 months at this branch, conducted by an independent forensic audit team working with cybersecurity since last night." Meredith bit her lip lightly. She slowly pulled out the oak chair and sat down, her plum-red polished fingers beginning to tremble slightly as she turned the first pages filled with cash flow charts and raw technical command lines. The forensic audit expert beside Robert stood, adjusted his metal-framed glasses, and began reading the report in a flat, cold voice, breaking through the final layers of the older woman's psychological defenses. At 2:14 a.m. "Last Sunday," the audit expert said, pointing to the highlighted line on page 14, "a system account under Aaliyah Vance's employee ID was used to approve an emergency transfer of $45,000 from the Employee Health Support Fund to a shell company account registered in Delaware. However, this entire process was not conducted from Ms. Aaliyah's personal computer. The transfer carried a unique digital signature installed on the Dell Latitude laptop with asset code VNL9942. The laptop assigned exclusively and personally by the company to Regional Finance Director Meredith Albright." Meredith immediately interrupted, her face starting to turn ash gray under the white lights, though her voice still tried to keep enough sharpness to manipulate the situation. "This is a blatant false accusation," Meredith said loudly, slamming both hands onto the conference table. "Everyone knows Aaliyah Vance is a financial analyst with strong programming skills. She could easily have hacked into my computer or forged my digital signature when I left my laptop at the office Friday afternoon, then framed me after the matter was exposed." The audit expert was not shaken by Meredith's resistance. He pushed another digital map containing location wave charts toward her. "Ms. Albright, you forgot one core detail in the company's new hardware security system," the expert continued, his voice becoming mercilessly firm. "All executive computers like your Dell Latitude are equipped with real-time hardware location chips linked to the building security system. The location logs show that device VNL9942 never left your private office that weekend. More importantly, the hallway surveillance camera on the 14th floor recorded you returning to the office alone at 1:50 a.m. on Sunday, carrying a large handbag and leaving at 3 a.m. That entire behavior sequence matches perfectly with the time when the $45,000 transfer was made. The fog of lies Meredith Albright had maintained for months was hit by a waterfall of digital evidence, stripping away the greed and cruelty of the villain beneath. The whole conference room fell into complete silence, so quiet that Meredith's fast, broken breathing could be heard. Her face now had no color left, and her trembling lips clung to the last broken pieces of old upper-class power. Robert, you have to let me explain, Meredith stammered, her voice lowering into a cowardly plea, the usual arrogance completely gone. This must be misunderstanding in the audit system. I am one of the long-standing shareholders of this branch. I have contributed 15 years to the growth of Vanguard Logistics. We cannot let this small incident damage the company's public image. Robert Vance stood from his chair. He did not shout. He did not slam the table. But the simple act of standing carried a weight that completely overpowered the boardroom. He placed both hands on the mahogany table, leaned forward, and looked directly into Meredith's eyes like a legal blade. 15 years of contribution is not a license for you to turn the medical welfare fund of struggling employees into a personal overdraft account for your derivative stock losses, Meredith, Robert Vance said, each word carrying deeply controlled anger. You have seriously violated your highest duty of loyalty to the corporation and its shareholders. The Supreme Board of Directors held an emergency meeting at 6 o'clock this morning New York time and approved the decision to strip you of all unexercised stock options, cancel all benefits, and terminate you immediately for serious legal violations with no severance of any kind. Meredith collapsed back into the chair like a lifeless body. The navy blue folder slipped from her powerless fingers and fell to the floor with a dry thud. At that moment, Robert Vance gave a small nod to the assistant waiting near the doorway. The boardroom door opened again. 2 men in plain gray suits with dark ties entered, metal badges from the Mecklenburg County Financial Crimes Unit pinned to their jackets. One of the detectives walked straight to Meredith's chair, pulled a document with the blue seal of the county court from his pocket, and read aloud the emergency arrest warrant for Meredith Albright on charges of embezzlement of company funds, corporate financial fraud, and intentionally framing another person. The click of stainless steel handcuffs sounded cold and sharp, locking around the wrists of the woman who, just yesterday, still held power over the jobs and lives of everyone in the branch. The detectives escorted Meredith to her feet. American corporate legal enforcement had no room for mercy or internal cover-ups once forensic audit evidence crossed into federal criminal law. The conference room door opened wide toward the shared work area on the 14th floor. It was 8:30 in the morning, and all 30 employees of the finance department were already at their cubicles. They were pretending to be busy with morning spreadsheets, but in truth, every one of them was holding their breath and watching the large conference room door. Meredith Albright was escorted down the main open hallway of the office. 2 police detectives walked on either side of her. The steel handcuffs were partly covered by a dark cloth, but nothing could hide the humiliated lowered head of the woman who had once terrified everyone. She had to walk the exact same path past the exact same rows of desks where 3 days earlier she had stood shouting, humiliating, and expelling Aaliyah Vance in front of the crowd. 30 white and black coworkers in the finance department all stopped what they were doing on their computers. They stood behind their cubicle walls, their eyes no longer avoiding or afraid, but filled with extreme shock mixed with a deep moral satisfaction as they watched the person who had manipulated the system finally pay for her cruelty. Sarah Jenkins stood at the corner of her desk, her hands shaking as she watched Meredith pass. Then her eyes shifted toward the conference room door, where Aaliyah Vance slowly stepped out behind Robert Vance. The collapse of a false kingdom happened quickly, coldly, and cleanly, exactly according to the operating logic of a large corporation, when justice was carried out through the power of clean, undeniable data. Meredith entered the elevator under police supervision, and when the metal doors closed, a soft collective breath of relief seemed to spread across the 14th floor office, closing the darkest chapter of corporate systemic injustice and opening a completely new reality for the dignity of honest workers. When the metal elevator doors closed, fully hiding Meredith Albright's humiliated figure and the 2 detectives, the air in the boardroom softened. The silence no longer felt suffocating or heavy with false judgment. Instead, it opened into a space of relief and restored dignity. Robert Vance slowly turned around. His eyes no longer had the sharp coldness from the confrontation with the villain. In their place was deep respect for the single mother sitting in the corner of the room. He walked to the mahogany table, picked up a smooth, dark green file with no folds, and approached Aaliyah Vance. He did not extend both hands in a superior way. He placed the file on the small table beside her, keeping a respectful distance according to the professional communication style of senior American executives. Aaliyah, Vanguard Logistics owes you an official written apology from headquarters, and it will be sent to your personal inbox within the next hour, Robert Vance said, his voice warm and deep, carrying the firmness of a man who respected the law and understood the value of excellent talent. But I know very well that in the real world, an empty apology or corporate comfort words will not pay your rent this month, and they certainly cannot pay little Maya's medical bills at Atrium Health tomorrow. Robert gently turned to the first page of the file, revealing a heading printed in the precise Arial font used by corporate HR. He pointed to the new appointment decision and slowly explained the practical terms. Starting at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, Aaliyah Vance would officially be appointed Regional Director of Internal Audit for the corporation, responsible for overseeing all cash flow and financial transparency across 3 major branches in eastern North Carolina. The new position came with a base salary exactly 60% higher than her previous mid-level analyst salary. More importantly, Aaliyah would report directly to headquarters in London, completely independent and no longer under the control of any local branch management. You do not need to worry about legal trouble or the Wells Fargo account freeze anymore, Robert Vance continued, a slight smile appearing on his experienced face as he saw Aaliyah's eyes begin to fill with tears of relief. Headquarters Legal has already sent the cancellation order for the internal fraud investigation request to the bank. All of your accounts will return to normal before noon today. The company will also cover all labor law expenses that may have arisen in your case over the past few days. However, what truly made Aaliyah's chest tremble with emotion was not the career promotion or the sudden jump in salary. Robert Vance turned to the 3rd page of the file, where there was a financial guarantee letter bearing a fresh signature and the raised seal of the Vanguard Education Fund. He explained that the executive board had approved a special clause under which the company would fully fund a lifetime talent development scholarship for Maya, including all tuition costs at specialized private schools and the full budget for long-term intensive psychological recovery treatment, regardless of whether Aaliyah continued working for the corporation in the future. This was real compensation based on Aaliyah's ability and quiet contributions, not a random charitable gift handed down from above. Aaliyah lowered her head slightly, 2 hot tears rolling down her cheeks. She did not say thank you with empty words. She only nodded softly and held the file tightly against her chest, as if she were holding the life raft for her little daughter's future. When Aaliyah stepped out of the glass tower of Vanguard Logistics late that afternoon, she no longer had to walk to the number 54 bus stop in the pouring rain, like she had 3 days earlier. Robert Vance's assistant had arranged a premium Uber Black for her, with the cost charged directly to the headquarters corporate card. Aaliyah sat in the back seat, resting her head against the soft leather cushion, looking through the window as the car passed through the busy streets of uptown Charlotte and slowly headed west toward the working-class West End. Old duplex houses and cheap general stores appeared under the warm orange-yellow sunset of late autumn. When the car stopped in front of the porch, Aaliyah stepped out with a completely different posture. Her shoulders were no longer heavy with fear of eviction or overdue medical bills. She pushed open the familiar wooden door. The floor still groaned beneath her feet, but the smell of sweet corn soup felt much more comforting today, Mrs. Helen had already gone home, and Maya was sitting alone in the middle of the living room, holding her small plastic communication board, her clear eyes fixed on the door as if she had been waiting for her mother's footsteps for a very long time. Aaliyah walked to her daughter and knelt on both knees on the knotted rug in the middle of the floor, pulling Maya's small, thin shoulders tightly into her arms. She no longer tried to hold back her feelings. Tears of happiness poured down, soaking into the shoulder of the child's gray t-shirt. Aaliyah slowly placed the promotion decision and her new gold-plated metal employee card, the symbol of her director of audit position, onto the fake wood plastic table right beside the wrinkled $5 bill Maya had given her the night before. Maya looked at her mother, her small eyes moving over the tears on Aaliyah's face before stopping on the shining employee card under the sun coming through the window. The 9-year-old gently touched her small fingers to her mother's cheek, wiping away the tears that had not yet dried. In the quiet space of the suburban home, a real miracle happened without the need for any expensive medicine. Maya slowly lowered the plastic board to the floor. After 2 long years of selective mutism caused by trauma, her little lips began to move. She spoke, her voice clear, slightly trembling, but every word was perfectly understandable. "Mommy, we're safe now, right? You don't have to skip lunch anymore, right?" The short sentence from her 9-year-old daughter was like a warm beam of light breaking through all the ice and darkness that had built up in Aaliyah's soul for years. She held Maya even tighter. Mother and daughter sobbed together in the middle of the living room, but this time it was not the choking cry of despair in the bathroom. It was the cry of healing, of dignity fully restored, and of absolute belief that the two of them had truly found a safe harbor after the long storms of life. Thank you for taking the time to stay with Aaliyah and Maya's story until these final moments. If there is one thing I want you to carry with you after this screen closes, it is this. Never underestimate someone quietly enduring pain in the corner of an office or a single mother silently taking the late bus every night. You never know what mountains they are carrying on their shoulders just to keep their children under a safe roof. And if you are an Aaliyah in real life, fighting an unfair system, skipping lunch to protect your family, remember this. Your dignity is something no termination decision and no false accusation can ever take away. Hold on to your integrity and your ability, because they are the lighthouse that will guide justice and fairness into your life. May peace, warmth, and the feeling of safety be present in your home tonight beside the people you love. I wish you a peaceful night.